Okay, everyone, welcome to this magical corner of my shop. They just breed disorder and chaos almost out of thin air. And these spots are also known to the layman as horizontal surfaces or workbenches. And as you can see here, this particular area is focused on my grinders and my drill sharpeners, my sanders. And a lot of these I use infrequently, but the thing is I still want to have access to them. And so it'd be nice to not have to, unbolt, rebolt, unclamp, reclamp every time I want to change kind of what I'm working on. So my hope here today is to actually design a solution to this corner that will allow me to have all the access to all the tools relatively quickly and optimize the space as much as possible. So to that end of making order out of chaos, oftentimes you might see people utilize lazy Susans. Lazy Susai? Lazy Susans. And it's really helpful because they're really slick, they spin around, they're super easy to use. But there's definitely some limitations to them that I'd hope to work around with a solution that we come up for this space. So stay tuned for that brilliant, or not so brilliant, I haven't actually tested it yet, so we'll see if it works out.
So the real disadvantage of a lazy Susan lies in the fact that the corners of a circle end up leaving a lot of unused space. So if we had a square, for example, you'll have about 27% more area to work with than a circle inscribed within that square. So my whole vision for this project was to try to make a rotatable square that I could pack all my grinders on in efforts of optimizing that space as much as possible. And although it's not necessarily needed for this project, I wanted to clean off the surface and reseal it with boiled linseed oil, I believe. No real particular reason other than that's how I originally finished this lab. And man, it just looked good. It wasn't planned. Those little markings in there were from a past grinder juice, I should say, that I used for cooling off my tools. It stained it really pretty way. Very rarely does this happen, but sometimes you find the perfect piece of wood that fits the perfect spot. And this so happened to be one of those times. It just needed a little bit of a trim, which was a perfect opportunity to do the first ever inaugural table saw cut. So every DIYer on YouTube does these cuts and these videos. I thought, you know what, I better jump on that train. Then before finalizing the placement, I just wanted to see it, so I got all the units in and just started moving them around to find the right orientation. And truth be told, this took a lot longer than I'd like to admit to in several trials and errors. But eventually I got to the point where I could sharpen my tools, I did some fit checks, and it seemed to work out just about perfect. And once I got those spacings and orientations all figured out, it was time to make my slippery surface. And you can see here I'm cutting these strips of high-density polyethylene from some scrap I had left over. And this is to create that frictionless surface on which my big square will be sliding around on. I wasn't positive if this would be enough. I have about 200 pounds worth of grinders riding on this square, and so I was hoping that when push came to shove, this surface would be sufficient to allow me to move it around without being so slippery that it would walk around when I tried sharpening tools. So I thought, you know what, let's just make it and see how it slides on the surface. And naturally just trimmed off some corners to make it a little bit more aesthetically pleasing and hopefully catch less on the corners when I was rotating it. So, moment of truth. Put it in place to see how it slipped, and man, it was beautifully sliding around. I think it was probably because I just oiled the table, so that was definitely helped. But I was really happy with the style of sliding it had. And I had to just kind of get a feel for what action would be required, and so the next step was to do a final fit check with all the units in place. And again, truth be told, I made additional changes here, and it took me a lot longer than I care to admit once again to get it right. But in the end, and through the magic of video editing, I was able to truncate this process a bit and figure out where to put them. So then marked holes for the actual two grinders, and was able to put bolts in those and lock them down. just well after drilling holes naturally. And the problem here I had to be careful of was making sure that my bolts weren't going to catch underneath, but those HDPE spacers around the edge were enough to offset the height of the platform such that the bolts wouldn't catch. So I won't go into depth now, but these foam blocks are quite possibly the most useful pieces or tools, I should say, in my shop. And I'm probably going to do a whole video about just those blocks because of how useful they are. And so it was time for my final fit check, and so I bolted the grinders down in place and then was able to put the other two grinders also in location to get a good feel for how heavy it was to move that platform around. Ultimately, pretty good. So my next challenge was power. And thankfully, once again, I found just the right pieces I needed for this problem. And the issue here is that if I took each grinder and wired it straight into the outlet on the right there, they would have gotten tangled up every time I tried twisting it. So instead, I wired up this 2-gang box, and that pigtail I was able to run vertically to the overhanging shelves above the whole platform. This allowed it to basically do several rotations before ever getting twisted, and I could always visually see how to twist it.
I love it. It works great. I can easily move it around. Oop. Might anchor that down. It's a little heavy, but honestly, if it's too light, it's going to vibrate off its stand. So there's that. So let's just give it a little test drive here, shall we? Looks awesome! I love it! It's so compact. It's so functional. It moves in and out really easy. I'm sure there's going to be quirks as I continue to get to know it and optimize it a bit. I've been thinking about how to put those spark reflectors in if need be. Maybe anchor down these two guys too so I have all solid surfaces to kind of pull and push on. But on a whole, for a morning project, this was actually a smashing success. So, I think that's a wrap. Maybe I'll do some voiceover or something. Maybe some non-sponsored brought to you buys because I don't have any sponsors. That being said, Costco, Home Depot, Festool, Rockler, may the bidding commence. I'm ready.
All right, scene one, take one. Scene one, take two. The first take actually was just me taking a picture of myself. I'll post it here.
This little spot's. This is hard. So to that end of organization and I had one more joke to tell, but I forgot what it was.